I saw a magazine in 1969 when I was in Vietnam, and it had a picture of a gyrocopter in there, and I always wanted to fly. And so from that, what materialized, my interest built and built, and over the years I finally took on the courage to build one. Gyrocopters are very safe. You can't look at my accident and think that gyrocopters are dangerous. They really aren't. Gyrocopters are very safe. They're easy to fly. You just don't want to catch yourself over an area where you can't land a gyrocopter if you have to in an emergency. On this particular day, as we reach the end of the runway, I'm preparing to turn right, and I look to my right, and there's an aircraft on my right-hand side flying parallel to me, 300 or 400, 500 feet. I don't remember the exact distance. But it prevented me from turning to the right that day, so we had to turn out to the left to fly the left-hand pattern. We were over the trees, and I can distinctly remember looking straight ahead and seeing the town golf course about a half a mile away, and for some reason what went through my mind was, sure do hope I can get to that golf course. It would be nice to be over that wide open area. Don't like flying over just thick trees. No sooner had I said that, with the engine running at full speed as we were climbing, the engine stopped.
Well, we had just finished getting Lifeguard 10 to land up at New River Valley for a PR event, and Ricky Hodge, who's one of our Blacksburg crew members, called in on his cell phone and said they had just gotten word that it was a possible helicopter crash up in the town of Blacksburg. I remember going down through the limbs. This must have been 40 or 50 feet above the ground, and I remember impacting the ground. Immediately I went ahead, got hold of Lifeguard 10's crew and had them start heading that way. They asked if I had any coordinates, and I did not, and I asked them if they could see smoke, and they said yes, and I told them to head that way.
Anytime you have an aircraft crash, the potential for trauma is unlimited. So everything going through your mind, you have to sort of slow yourself down and remember to follow the ABCs. Think fundamentally. So I was thinking right off the bat that he may need his airway secured if there was a fire involved.
So I heard helicopter down Ardmore Street, which was my street. So I poked my head out the door, but I didn't see anything. So I thought, well, maybe there's something, strange going on. But I went in and got my uniform on, started working up, trying to, until I get some more direction from the radio. And checked back outside, and by that time I heard screaming.
I heard that it was on Ardmore Street, and since that's where I live, what I did then is I immediately kicked in my lights on the bypass, came rushing back into town, at the same time called my daughter to find out where the crash occurred, found out it was not in my exact backyard, got to my house and immediately went over to the crash site.
When I came to, some gentlemen had cut from the yard sale, had heard this lady whose yard we crashed in or landed in, screaming, and they came over to help her.
When responding to the scene, just trying to figure out what we were going to need, trying to establish what we were going to be working with. We didn't really have any idea that it was going to be what it was. Didn't realize that there was going to be actually, several, two patients and somebody still inside.
When I jumped up and attempted to get her out of there, the engine was on fire. I remember it was very hot. As I was reaching for her seat belt, I blacked out, and I can only assume at that time that the fuel tanks exploded.
When I first arrived, I noticed that there was an aircraft in the backyard that was still on fire. I noticed that there was a male patient laying on the ground. There were a bunch of other bystanders just kind of running around, still unsure exactly what we had at the time, other than an aircraft down.
At that moment, we realized that we needed more resources on scene, called for another unit to respond, ALS members to respond, and everyone arrived on scene at that point.
Well, we always try to think in the patient's best interest and what our area hospital is capable of handling. Anything, that would indicate that kind of mechanism of trauma or the possibility of burns, we wanted to get them to the appropriate facility as quickly as possible. So we always try to think about that in our scene response, and oftentimes we'll call for the helicopter before we actually get on scene.
Well, this gentleman sustained probably the worst kind of trauma you can have. He actually crashed an aircraft, and the potential for trauma, even though he was ambulatory, is just exponential because he decelerated so fast. So they recognized his mechanism of injury, plus his obvious overt injuries such as his burns, and the major potential for airway involvement, and knew right off the bat he needed a trauma center with definitive intervention.
By the time we got to the patient, he had already been packaged. So we were starting to do some more invasive maneuvers, starting the IVs, looking for some IV sites for this patient. The lifeguard crew arrived on scene pretty early on, since they had been in Christiansburg also, and they were able to assist us with some airway techniques and looking for some IV sites. They ended up actually doing the easy IO and pushing some medications for this patient.
Well, what struck me the most was we acted as a complete unit. There was no doubt about it. There was complete synchronicity in everything we were doing. There was calmness in the ambulance. The patient was awake and talking to us. He was asking for help. We reassured him, we communicated with each other, and we secured his airway. It was the first thing we had to do. He had had burns to his upper body and his arms, and we feared that he probably had some airway involvement. The flight time was 12 minutes from the scene to the hospital. The ground transport time from the scene to the same hospital would have been 45 minutes. So you can see the savings was just absolutely incredible.
Lifeguard 10, route to RMH, estimated ETA approximately 9 minutes, 4 souls on board, 1 hour, 40 on fuel.
Well, there's several issues that you really worry about in the burn/blunt trauma patient. One is that there may be an airway problem, not just from the potential blunt trauma, but from the burn injuries itself. Inhalation injury is a significant problem in burns. It's more common in indoor injuries, and this was an outdoor injury, but you don't know for sure that the patient isn't going to have an airway obstruction. Handling an airway obstruction from burns in the field is very difficult, sometimes I would say almost impossible. So the best thing to do is to get the patient into the hospital where the airway can be managed on an emergent basis very quickly.
I remember talking to the ER nurse that was in the trauma bay, and I said, this ain't good. This guy's got a lot of percentage body surface area burn. He's got inhalation injuries. It's a lot, like 65% is what we estimated. So they was continuing with fluid replacement therapy, which is the big thing with burns, we all know. And we just continued that on the way up and give him paralytics to keep him down because we didn't want him to wake up or respond with the inhalation burns, put him on the ventilator and some PEEP.
We got a report from the staff there and prepared the patient for a transport, put him on air equipment, and took the patient to the rooftop and loaded him into our helicopter for the transport to University of Virginia.
To date, I've had 8 surgeries. I think I have 3 or 4 to go still, but I'm making progress every day, and I want to thank everybody who saved my life.